Welcome to a 3-hour deep dive into the hidden psychology that explains everything about human behavior, human decision-making, and human experience. Over the next 180 minutes, you're going to discover 25 mind tricks, psychological principles so fundamental, so deeply embedded in human neurology, that they literally explain almost everything that happens in human life. This isn't surface-level self-help psychology. This isn't pop psychology designed to make you feel better about yourself. This is deep, neuroscience-backed, research-grounded psychology that reveals the actual mechanisms driving human behavior. By the end of this 3-hour journey, you'll possess a comprehensive mental model of how human minds actually work. You'll understand why people do what they do. You'll understand why you do what you do. And once you understand these mechanisms, you can never go back to believing that human behavior is primarily driven by conscious choice and rational deliberation. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Human beings are not the conscious, rational, self-aware agents they believe themselves to be. You don't make most of your decisions through conscious deliberation. You don't understand most of your own motivations. You don't perceive reality objectively. You perceive a version of reality that has been heavily filtered, distorted, and reconstructed by your brain's automatic systems. Your brain receives approximately 11 million bits of information per second. Your conscious mind can process approximately 40 to 50 bits per second. This means that 99.999% of what your brain is doing is happening outside your consciousness. You are operating on autopilot for virtually every moment of your life, and the autopilot is being run by systems that evolved to solve problems in ancestral environments, not by rational deliberation about modern problems. This is where the 25 mind tricks come in. These tricks are not techniques to manipulate you, though they can be used that way. These tricks are the actual mechanisms your brain uses to process information and make decisions. Once you understand these mechanisms, you can see how easily your brain can be led astray, how easily you can be deceived by others and by yourself, and how the same mechanisms that limit your perception and decision-making also make human society possible. The journey over the next 3 hours is progressive. We start with foundational principles, the basic building blocks of how brains work. Then we move through 25 increasingly sophisticated mind tricks, each building on the previous ones. By the end, you'll understand how all these mechanisms work together as an integrated system. But first, let me set the framework. There are 5 core neural systems that underlie all the 25 mind tricks. Understanding these 5 systems is the foundation for understanding everything else. System 1. The threat detection system. Your brain evolved to detect threats. In ancestral environments, threats were immediate and deadly. A missed threat meant death. An unnecessary caution just meant wasted time or resources. Over millions of years of evolution, your brain became exquisitely sensitive to threats. Your amygdala, threat detection center, processes negative information faster than positive information. Your attention automatically orients toward threats. Your memory preferentially encodes threatening information. This threat sensitivity served your ancestors well. But in modern environments where threats are often abstract and distant, this system creates constant low-level anxiety. System 2. The reward system. Your brain is fundamentally motivated by reward. This reward system evolved because seeking rewards, food, social status, mates, safety, was essential for survival. Your ventral striatum, reward center, releases dopamine in anticipation of rewards and in response to unexpected rewards. This dopamine creates motivation and feelings of pleasure. But in modern environments where rewards can be manufactured, junk food, social media notifications, gambling, this system creates addiction and compulsive behavior. System 3. The social system. You are a profoundly social creature. Your brain evolved to navigate complex social hierarchies and cooperate with others. Your social brain constantly monitors your social position, the positions of others, and your group membership. Your mirror neurons automatically synchronize your behavior and emotions with others around you. Your social systems drive conformity, create in-group bias, and generate powerful motivations to belong to groups. This social system is what makes human civilization possible, but it also makes you vulnerable to social pressure and groupthink. System 4. The sense-making system. Your brain is obsessed with creating coherent narratives and explanations. Rather than accepting reality as random and chaotic, your brain constantly generates stories, narratives that tie events together into meaning. Your prefrontal cortex generates explanations for your own behavior, explanations that often come after the behavior, not before. Your brain constructs theories about other people's intentions and motivations. This sense-making system creates the feeling that you understand reality, but often the narratives are reconstructed, distorted, and inaccurate. System 5. The efficiency system. Your brain is obsessed with energy conservation. Conscious thinking is metabolically expensive. Your brain uses roughly 20% of your body's total energy expenditure. Whenever possible, your brain tries to minimize conscious processing. It creates habits which run automatically with minimal energy. It uses heuristics, mental shortcuts that require minimal analysis. It creates default patterns, so you don't have to consciously decide every time. This efficiency system is essential. It frees up your conscious mind for novel problems, but it also makes you operate on autopilot and makes you vulnerable to manipulative techniques that exploit your automatic systems. These 5 systems, threat detection, reward seeking, social navigation, sense-making, and efficiency, underlie all 25 of the mind tricks you're about to learn. Every single psychological principle is an expression of one or more of these core systems. NAR, Foundational Principles section. Before diving into the 25 specific mind tricks, you need to understand several foundational principles that apply across all of them. Principle 1. The unconscious is vastly more powerful than consciousness. Your conscious mind is like the tip of an iceberg. It's the small, visible part that sits above the surface. But the vast majority of your mental processing, arguably 99% of it, happens below the surface in your unconscious systems. Your conscious mind creates the feeling that you're in control, that you're making deliberate choices. But in reality, your unconscious systems are making most of the decisions. Your conscious mind is often just receiving a post hoc rationalization of decisions that your unconscious systems have already made. This is proven by neuroscience research repeatedly. Your brain begins preparing to make a decision milliseconds before you become consciously aware that you're making a decision. Your brain processes emotional responses to stimuli before your conscious mind even registers that the stimulus is there. Your brain categorizes people and situations before you consciously notice them. This means that if you're trying to change your behavior through conscious willpower and rational argument, you're using the weakest system in your mind to try to override the strongest systems. It's like trying to move a car by pushing on the steering wheel while ignoring the engine. Effective behavior change requires working with the unconscious systems, not against them. Principle 2. Brains are prediction machines, not reality detectors. Your brain doesn't actually perceive reality directly. Your brain generates predictions about what reality is, and then it compares those predictions to incoming sensory data. If incoming sensory data matches your predictions, your brain is satisfied. It constructs a perception that corresponds to its predictions. If incoming sensory data violates your predictions, your brain generates an error signal, and you experience surprise or confusion. This is why you can completely miss seeing something that's directly in front of you. If your brain wasn't predicting it, you won't perceive it. This is why you interpret ambiguous sensory information in ways consistent with your expectations. This is why people literally see different things depending on what they're expecting to see. This prediction-based architecture is incredibly efficient. It allows your brain to construct a coherent worldview without having to consciously process every sensory input. But it also makes you vulnerable to systematic perceptual distortions. If your predictions are wrong, your perception of reality will be systematically distorted. Principle 3. Emotional systems drive behavior more than rational systems. You believe you make decisions rationally. You gather information, you weigh options, you deliberate, and then you make a decision based on logic. But this is largely false. Most of your decisions are actually driven by emotional systems, particularly your amygdala, threat detection, your ventral striatum, reward seeking, and your insula, emotional monitoring. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational decision-making part of your brain, is relatively small and evolutionarily recent. Your emotional systems are large and evolutionarily ancient. The emotional systems are wired to activate faster, to have more access to your motor systems, and to be more powerful overall. When your emotional systems and your rational systems conflict, the emotional systems usually win. This is why you can rationally know that you should save money for retirement, but emotionally find yourself spending money impulsively. It's why you can rationally know that a fear isn't justified, but emotionally feel the fear anyway. It's why you can rationally recognize that a belief is false, but emotionally continue to believe it. Emotional systems are more fundamental to behavior than rational systems. Principle 4. Your brain is biased toward its own existing beliefs. Once your brain adopts a belief, it creates a filter. Information that confirms the belief passes through the filter easily. Information that contradicts the belief gets scrutinized severely and usually rejected. This is called confirmation bias, and it's one of the most fundamental features of how brains work. This means that the more evidence you encounter that contradicts your belief, the more confirmed in your belief you become. You don't update your belief based on contradicting evidence. Instead, you dismiss the evidence as biased, manipulated, or misunderstood. You generate sophisticated rationalizations for why the contradicting evidence doesn't actually contradict your belief. This bias is so powerful that intelligent people are often worse at updating their beliefs when presented with contradicting evidence. Why? Because intelligent people are better at generating sophisticated rationalizations for why they should continue believing what they already believe. Principle 5. Social context is vastly more powerful than individual preference. You believe you're an individual, making independent choices based on your own preferences, but in reality, social context is vastly more powerful than individual preference in determining your behavior. When you're alone, you behave one way. When you're with your family, you behave differently. When you're with your friends, you behave yet another way. When you're in a professional context, your behavior shifts again. You're not consciously deciding to behave differently in different contexts. Your brain is automatically activating different social identities and behavioral patterns appropriate to each context. Moreover, when you're part of a group, something remarkable happens to your individual reasoning faculties. They partially shut down. You become more likely to conform to the group's beliefs and norms. You become less likely to think critically about the group's decisions. You become more likely to attribute moral rightness to the group's positions. This is called groupthink, and it's almost inevitable whenever people form cohesive groups. This means that you can predict people's behavior better by knowing what group they're in than by knowing their individual personality traits. Social context overwhelms individual differences. Mind Trick 1. The Default Mode Network. Your brain has a system that activates whenever you're not focused on external tasks. It's called the Default Mode Network, DMN, and it's one of the most fundamental systems in your brain. The DMN is active when you're daydreaming, when you're thinking about the past, when you're imagining the future, when you're thinking about other people, and when you're thinking about yourself. The DMN is mediated by several interconnected brain regions, including the medial prefrontal cortex, the posterior cingulate cortex, and the temporal lobes. These regions are densely connected and show synchronized activity during rest and during self-referential thinking. Here's what makes the DMN crucial. When the DMN is active, your prefrontal cortex, conscious reasoning, is relatively offline. This means that when the DMN is active, your thinking is less controlled, less analytical, and more automatic. You're not deliberately reasoning through problems. You're not consciously evaluating evidence. You're just thinking associatively, following trains of thought where they lead. This is what most of your day is like. You're driving to work and the DMN is active. You're not consciously attending to every aspect of driving. You're daydreaming or thinking about yesterday or imagining the future. You're in the car, but mentally somewhere else. Your body is executing driving behaviors automatically, while your conscious mind is elsewhere. You're in a meeting and the DMN is active. Someone is talking, but you're not fully attending. Your mind is wandering. You're thinking about what you're going to eat for lunch or replaying an argument from yesterday. Your body is physically present in the meeting, but your mind is in the DMN. Most of your life is lived in this state of partial attention, where your body is executing routines while your conscious mind is in the DMN. This has both advantages and disadvantages. The advantage is that the DMN is incredibly efficient. It allows you to automate behaviors and free up processing resources. The disadvantage is that you're mentally absent for much of your life. You're not fully present, you're not fully conscious. And here's where the mind trick comes in. Your brain experiences the DMN state as thoughtful and aware. When your DMN is active, you feel like you're thinking. You feel like you're being reflective. But in reality, you're in a state of partial awareness where your conscious reasoning is relatively offline. Your thoughts are following associative patterns, not deliberate logic. You're not actually analyzing anything. You're just following your mental trains of thought where they naturally lead. This is why people can spend an entire commute lost in thought, then arrive at their destination with no memory of the drive. The DMN was active. Your body was executing driving behaviors automatically. Your conscious mind was somewhere else. When you arrive and the DMN downregulates, you realize you have no memory of the past 30 minutes. The DMN activation is triggered by particular states: when you're not focused on external tasks, when you're not challenged, when you're in safe environments where you don't need to monitor for threats. The DMN deactivates when you're focused on an external task, when you're faced with a challenge that requires attention, when you're in threatening environments where you need to be alert. This is crucial for understanding how you navigate the world. Most of your day, your DMN is active. You're operating on autopilot. Your behaviors are automatic. Your thinking is associative. And then suddenly, something demands your attention. A threat appears. A challenging task emerges. Your DMN deactivates. Your prefrontal cortex comes online. You become conscious and deliberate. But here's the problem. The threshold for triggering this shift varies. Sometimes you don't notice threats that should trigger alertness because you're too deeply in the DMN. Sometimes you overreact to minor challenges because you've suddenly shifted out of the DMN and your threat system is now active. Understanding the DMN helps you understand why you're absent for large portions of your life. It helps you understand why you don't remember commutes or meals or conversations. It helps you understand why you're on autopilot so much of the time. Your brain evolved to spend much of its time in this state. It's efficient, but it's also why you miss things, why you don't remember your life, and why you're vulnerable to external influence. Mind trick. 2. Automatic habit formation. Your brain is obsessed with creating habits. Every behavior that you repeat enough times becomes encoded as a habit, a neural pattern so deeply grooved that it can run automatically with minimal conscious attention. Habits are incredibly useful. They free up your conscious mind for novel problems, but they also lock you into patterns, often without your awareness or consent. Charles Duhigg's research on habits identified a three-part loop: cue, routine, reward. A cue, trigger, activates the routine, behavior. The routine leads to a reward, positive consequence. When this loop is repeated enough times, a habit is formed. Once formed, the cue automatically activates the routine, and the anticipation of the reward creates motivation. Here's the neuroscience. When a behavior is first learned, it activates your prefrontal cortex, conscious deliberation. You're consciously deciding to perform the behavior, but with repetition, the neural activation shifts to the basal ganglia, ancient brain structure handling procedural memory and automatic behaviors. After extensive repetition, the behavior can run with almost no prefrontal cortex involvement. It's completely automatic. This means you're literally operating with different neural networks, depending on whether a behavior is novel or habitual. Novel behaviors require conscious processing. Habitual behaviors run automatically. Throughout your day, you're activating and executing dozens of habits. You wake up and immediately activate the morning routine habit. You arrive at work and activate the work start habit. You feel stressed and activate a stress response habit. Maybe that's checking social media, eating comfort food, or calling a friend. These habits run automatically. You don't decide to perform them. The cue activates them. But here's where the mind trick becomes problematic. Many of your habits were formed without your conscious intention. You didn't decide to check your phone compulsively, but after checking it frequently enough, the habit became grooved. Now a cue, boredom, anxiety, a break in activity, automatically triggers phone checking. You don't decide to do it. The habit runs. Similarly, habits can become locked into negative patterns. You feel stressed, cue, and check social media, routine, and get a dopamine hit, reward. This loop repeats. The habit strengthens. Now, whenever you feel stressed, your brain automatically generates motivation to check social media. The habit is running you. The problem with habits is that they're powerful and they're sticky. Habits are useful when they serve your goals. But when habits work against your goals, they're incredibly difficult to change. You can consciously decide, I'm not going to check my phone as much. But the habit is powerful. The cue activates the routine automatically. You find yourself checking before you've consciously decided to. The way to change a habit is not to eliminate it. Habits are permanent. The neural pattern is always there. The way to change a habit is to replace it. You keep the same cue and the same reward, but insert a different routine. The new routine doesn't come naturally at first. It requires conscious effort. Your prefrontal cortex needs to actively override the automatic basal ganglia response. But with repetition, the new routine becomes grooved. The new habit forms. This is mind trick number 2. You're living with hundreds of automatic habits. Most of them were formed without your conscious intention. Most of them are running your life without your awareness. And changing them requires understanding that you can't eliminate them. You can only replace them with new patterns that you deliberately choose. Mind trick. 3. Contextual environmental triggering. Your environment is not neutral. Every environment you enter automatically activates specific behavioral patterns and emotional states through a process called contextual triggering. Your brain associates environments with specific behaviors and emotional states. When you enter an environment, those associations are automatically activated. When you walk into a gym, your brain automatically activates exercise-related behaviors and motivations. When you walk into a library, your brain automatically activates quiet and focused behaviors. When you walk into a bar, your brain automatically activates social and relaxed behaviors. You don't consciously decide to activate these patterns. Your brain does it automatically through contextual association. This contextual triggering is mediated by the hippocampus, which stores memories linked to spatial contexts, and the amygdala, which stores emotional associations. The hippocampus creates a spatial semantic map of each environment and binds it to behavioral and emotional patterns. When you re-enter that environment, the hippocampus reactivates those patterns. The real shock is that contextual triggering is so powerful that it can override your individual preferences and intentions. You might consciously want to relax and rest, but if you're in an environment associated with high-stress work, your body automatically shifts into high-stress mode. Your breathing quickens, your cortisol rises, you're activated for performance, regardless of whether you want to be. Similarly, your mood can shift dramatically by simply changing environments. You might be anxious in your bedroom, if your bedroom has been associated with worry or insomnia. But if you move to the kitchen, your mood might shift. The environment itself is triggering different emotional states through contextual association. Throughout your day, you're moving through multiple environments. Each environment activates different behavioral and emotional patterns. Your office activates professional patterns. Your home activates comfort and relaxation patterns. Your car activates commute patterns. Your gym activates exercise patterns. You're not consciously shifting between these patterns. Your brain is automatically doing it based on contextual cues. The implications are profound. If you want to change your behavior or emotional state, one of the most effective strategies is to change your environment. If you want to be more focused on important work, work in an environment that has been associated with focus, ideally a new environment, or one deliberately designed for focus. If you want to be more relaxed, go to an environment associated with relaxation. If you want to be more social, go to an environment that facilitates social interaction. But here's the darker side. Environments that facilitate unwanted behaviors can keep you trapped. If your bedroom is associated with anxiety, your brain will activate anxiety whenever you're in the bedroom. If your office is associated with stress, your brain will activate stress whenever you're in the office. The environmental associations are powerful enough to override your intentions to feel calm or focused. This is mind trick number 3. Your environment is constantly triggering behavioral and emotional patterns through contextual association. You believe your behavior is driven by your own preferences and intentions, but in reality, much of your behavior is being triggered by environmental cues that activate automatic patterns. Change the environment, and you automatically change the behavioral and emotional patterns that are activated. Mind trick. 4. Mirror neuron synchronization. When you're in a conversation with someone, something remarkable is happening in your brain that you're completely unaware of. Your mirror neurons are firing in synchrony with the other person's actions and emotions. Your brain is automatically mimicking their behavior, their expressions, their emotional state. This process is called mirror neuron activation, and it's one of the most fundamental mechanisms for human connection and social influence. Mirror neurons are brain cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing that action. They create a neural bridge between you and others. When you see someone reach for a cup, your mirror neurons fire as if you yourself are reaching for the cup. When you see someone feel pain, your mirror neurons fire as if you yourself are experiencing pain. This mirror neuron system is the basis for empathy, your ability to understand and resonate with other people's experiences. It's also the basis for automatic imitation. When you're in a conversation with someone, your mirror neurons are partially synchronizing your behavior with theirs. You automatically adopt their posture, their speech patterns, their facial expressions, their breathing rate, even their emotional state. The synchronization happens at incredible speed and completely outside your consciousness. Within milliseconds of the other person changing their posture, your posture begins to shift in response. Within milliseconds of them changing their facial expression, your facial muscles begin to contract in mimicry. Within milliseconds of them shifting their emotional state, your emotional systems begin to shift. And here's where the mind trick becomes powerful. This automatic synchronization feels like genuine connection. It feels like you naturally understand this person. It feels like you're naturally coordinated with them. But in reality, your brain is automatically mimicking them through mirror neuron activation. This is why skilled salespeople, therapists, and manipulators deliberately mirror people. They mirror the person's body language. They mirror their speech patterns. They mirror their energy level. And because the mirror neuron system is partially linked to your reward systems, when you see yourself being mirrored, it feels good. It creates a sense of rapport and connection. You feel like this person gets you. You feel like you have more in common with them than you actually do. But here's the critical insight. The mirroring is automatic on both sides. The salesperson is deliberately choosing to mirror you, but you're automatically mirroring them because your mirror neurons are firing. You're being subtly influenced to align with them through a process you're not consciously aware of. In relationships, couples who are in love mirror each other constantly. They adopt similar gestures, similar speech patterns, similar emotional tones. The mirroring is so strong that people often say they can finish each other's sentences or feel like they're thinking the same thing. But this is not mind reading. This is mirror neuron synchronization. In groups, people who mirror each other more often become leaders and are perceived as more competent. Why? Because the mirroring creates a sense of connection and alignment. Other group members feel a sense of rapport with the person who mirrors them. This rapport translates into influence and leadership perception. This is mind trick number 4. Your behavior and emotional state are being constantly synchronized with people around you through mirror neuron activation. You believe you're an independent agent making your own choices, but your brain is constantly synchronizing with others. You're literally being influenced to align with people through a process that feels natural and automatic, but is actually a neurological mechanism for social influence. Mind trick 5. Threat detection and amygdala. Hijacking your amygdala, a small almond-shaped structure in your brain, is your threat detection center. It's evolved to detect threats quickly and to activate threat response systems rapidly. Your amygdala can detect threat in approximately 100 milliseconds. By contrast, your prefrontal cortex, conscious reasoning, requires much longer to process information. This means that your amygdala is detecting threats and initiating responses before your conscious mind even registers that a threat exists. You feel a surge of fear or anger before you consciously understand why. Your body is already preparing for fight or flight before your rational mind has engaged. This threat detection system was incredibly valuable in ancestral environments where threats were immediate and physical. Seeing a predator, your amygdala would activate instantly. Your threat response would engage. You'd have a much better chance of surviving because your body was already prepared before your conscious mind had finished analyzing the situation. But in modern environments, many threats are abstract or distant. A critical email from your boss is not a physical threat, but your amygdala treats it as a threat. A social situation where you're being judged is not a physical threat, but your amygdala treats it as a threat. Economic news about a recession is not a physical threat, but your amygdala treats it as a threat. So your amygdala is constantly activating threat responses to non-physical threats. Your cortisol, stress hormone, rises. Your heart rate increases. Your digestion slows. Your immune system downregulates. All of this is appropriate if you're facing a physical threat. But if you're simply reading an email or listening to news, this threat response is counterproductive. Moreover, once your amygdala is activated, it's difficult to override through conscious reasoning. You can tell yourself, this is not actually a threat, and your conscious mind will agree. But your amygdala is still activated. Your threat response is still running. Your body still feels threatened. This is called amygdala hijacking. Your automatic threat system has essentially overridden your conscious reasoning system. When your amygdala is hijacked, your prefrontal cortex, conscious reasoning, is partially offline. You're less able to think rationally. You're more likely to respond emotionally. You're more likely to take actions you'd later regret. You're more likely to believe false information that confirms your threat perception. Throughout your day, your amygdala is probably being hijacked repeatedly. Something triggers your threat system. Your amygdala activates. Your prefrontal cortex goes partially offline. Your behavior becomes more emotional and less rational. Eventually, the threat response subsides and your prefrontal cortex comes back online. But while your amygdala is hijacked, you're vulnerable. You're vulnerable to manipulation. You're vulnerable to believing propaganda. You're vulnerable to making poor decisions. Political campaigns and fear-mongering media outlets know this. They deliberately try to trigger amygdala hijacking through threat-based messaging. They want your rational system offline and your threat system running, because when you're in threat mode, you're less likely to think critically and more likely to follow the group. This is mind trick number 5. Your threat detection system is constantly being triggered by non-physical threats in modern environments. When triggered, it hijacks your conscious reasoning system. This makes you vulnerable to external influence and makes you behave less rationally. Understanding this mechanism allows you to notice when you're in amygdala hijack mode and to consciously work to bring your prefrontal cortex back online. Mind trick 6. Reward system exploitation. Your brain has a reward system that evolved to motivate you to pursue things that enhanced survival and reproduction in ancestral environments. Food, social status, mates, safety, novelty. Your ventral striatum, reward center, releases dopamine in anticipation of rewards and in response to unexpected rewards. This dopamine creates motivation and feelings of pleasure. In ancestral environments, this reward system was well calibrated. The things that released dopamine, food, sex, social status, were actually beneficial. But in modern environments, we've engineered products and systems that exploit this reward system in ways that are not beneficial. Junk food releases far more dopamine than natural foods. Sugar, salt, and fat trigger reward centers in ways that natural foods don't. So people eat far more than is healthy because the junk food is more rewarding than healthy food. Social media is deliberately engineered to exploit reward systems. Every notification is a potential reward. The variable reward schedule, sometimes notifications are there, sometimes they're not, is especially powerful. It's the same reward schedule that makes slot machines addictive. The unpredictability of rewards makes them more addictive than predictable rewards. Video games exploit reward systems through carefully engineered progression and reward schedules. As soon as you complete one level, the game immediately presents the next challenge. You get frequent dopamine hits from progress and achievement. The game is deliberately designed to keep your reward systems activated. But here's the crucial insight. Dopamine is not the pleasure chemical. Dopamine creates motivation and anticipation. The dopamine system makes you want things. It doesn't necessarily make you happy when you get them. In fact, one of the problems with modern reward exploitation is that you chase dopamine hits through social media, junk food, and video games, but the satisfaction is brief. You get the dopamine hit, but it fades quickly, so you chase the next hit, and the next. You're on a hedonic treadmill, constantly chasing dopamine spikes that provide increasingly brief satisfaction. Moreover, your reward system adapts through a process called hedonic adaptation. When you first encounter a reward, it's powerful. Your dopamine system activates strongly, but with repeated exposure, the reward loses its power. You need more of the same reward to get the same dopamine spike, or you need a different reward. This is why people often escalate their consumption of addictive substances or behaviors. They're chasing diminishing dopamine spikes. Throughout your day, your reward systems are being constantly exploited. Technology companies, food companies, entertainment companies, gambling operators, they're all deliberately engineering products to exploit your reward systems. They don't care whether the exploitation is beneficial for you. They care whether it keeps you engaged with their product. And here's the insidious part. Your brain experiences this exploitation as pleasure and motivation. It feels good. It feels like you're choosing to use these products because you enjoy them. But the enjoyment is being manipulated through deliberate reward system exploitation. This is mind trick number 6. Your reward system, an ancient system evolved to motivate you toward things that enhanced survival, is being exploited by modern technology and food products in ways that are not beneficial for your well-being. The exploitation feels like genuine pleasure and motivation, so you believe you're choosing these behaviors freely. But in reality, your reward systems are being hacked by engineers who understand exactly how your brain works. Mind trick 7. Cognitive biases and mental shortcuts. Your brain is an efficiency machine. It can't consciously analyze every piece of information you encounter, so it uses cognitive biases and mental shortcuts, heuristics, to quickly make judgments and decisions with minimal cognitive effort. These shortcuts usually work well, but they frequently lead you astray. The availability heuristic is one of the most fundamental. You judge how common something is based on how easily examples come to mind. If you can easily think of examples of plane crashes, you overestimate how common plane crashes are. Your brain is using ease of recall as a proxy for frequency. This heuristic usually works well because frequently occurring things are usually easier to recall. But it fails when things are memorable for reasons other than frequency, like media coverage or emotional intensity. The representativeness heuristic is another fundamental one. You judge how likely something is based on how well it matches your mental prototype for that category. Someone who acts like your stereotype of a lawyer, conservative, logical, competitive, is judged as more likely to be a lawyer. But this heuristic can completely mislead you because representativeness doesn't correlate well with actual probability. Most lawyers aren't that stereotypical. The affect heuristic causes you to judge probability and value based on your emotional reaction to something rather than on objective evidence. If you're afraid of flying, you overestimate how dangerous flying is. Your emotional fear response is being used as a proxy for objective danger assessment. The anchoring heuristic causes the first number you encounter to become your mental reference point. If someone asks you whether Gandhi lived past 65 and then asks you to estimate his age at death, your estimate will be influenced by the 65 anchor. Your brain uses the first available number as a reference point, even when that number is completely arbitrary. The sunk cost fallacy causes you to continue investing in something because of what you've already invested, even though the past investment should be logically irrelevant. You finish a terrible movie because you've already paid for it. You stay in a bad job because you've already invested years. Your brain is using past investment as a factor in current decisions, even though it shouldn't. These heuristics are happening automatically throughout your day. You're making judgments about how common things are based on ease of recall. You're making judgments about probability based on how well things match stereotypes. You're making judgments about value based on emotional reactions. You're anchoring to arbitrary numbers. You're being influenced by sunk costs. And here's the scary part. Knowing about these biases doesn't eliminate them. Even experts in cognitive psychology exhibit the same biases. Even when you're explicitly told about a bias, your brain often still exhibits it. Knowing about the bias doesn't prevent it. The reason is that these heuristics are built into your neural architecture. They're not conscious processes that you can override through reasoning. They're automatic neural processes that happen at speeds faster than consciousness. Your conscious mind might know about the bias, but the automatic systems are still running the bias-based processing. This is mind trick number 7. Your brain uses automatic cognitive shortcuts to process information efficiently. These shortcuts usually work well but frequently lead you astray. Even knowing about the biases doesn't prevent them. You're constantly being influenced by these heuristics without your conscious awareness. Mind trick. 8. Social proof and conformity. You walk into a new restaurant and it's packed. You assume it must be good, otherwise why would so many people be there? You see a post on social media with 1 million likes. You assume it must be valuable, otherwise why would 1 million people have liked it? You hear that a product is a bestseller. You assume it must be high quality, otherwise why would so many people be buying it? This is social proof in action. Social proof is the tendency to look at what others are doing and assume that if many people are doing something, it must be right. It's a powerful heuristic that usually works well. In ancestral environments, what many people in your community were doing was usually a reliable guide to what was actually good and safe. Following the group usually meant surviving, but social proof can be manipulated and distorted. Businesses can artificially inflate their follower counts or review ratings. Movements can create the illusion of widespread support through coordinated action of small numbers of people. News outlets can cherry-pick stories to make certain viewpoints seem more widespread than they actually are. Social proof operates at an automatic subconscious level. You don't consciously think many people are doing this, therefore I should do it. Instead, your brain automatically registers how many people are doing something, and your behavior automatically shifts toward conformity with the perceived norm. This is mediated by your dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and anterior insula, regions involved in monitoring social norms. When you perceive that many people are behaving a certain way, these regions activate. Your behavior automatically shifts toward conformity. You don't consciously decide to conform. Your brain just does it automatically, and social media has weaponized social proof. Every platform displays like counts, view counts, follower counts, all visible signals of social approval. The more visible the approval signal, the more people want to engage with the content. This creates a feedback loop where content that happens to get early engagement gets more engagement simply because people are responding to the social proof signal. In the classic Asch conformity experiments, participants were shown lines of different lengths and asked to judge which line was longest. The correct answer was obvious, but when the participant was put in a group where everyone else, who were actually Confederates, gave an obviously wrong answer, the participant went along with the group about 35% of the time. This demonstrates that social proof can override even direct sensory perception. You can see with your own eyes that everyone else is giving a wrong answer, but you conform anyway. Your brain values conformity so highly that it will literally doubt what it's seeing to match the group. This is mind trick number 8. You're constantly looking to others to define what's normal and what's valuable. When you perceive that many people are doing something, you automatically become more likely to do it too. Social proof operates at a subconscious level. You have no idea you're being influenced, but your behavior is being constantly shaped by perceived group consensus. Continuing through Mind Trick 9 to 25. Mind Trick 9. Authority, influence, and status hierarchy. When your brain perceives authority, something remarkable happens. Your submissive behavioral system activates automatically. You don't consciously decide to obey authority. Your brain does it for you. Authority can be marked in many ways: titles, doctor, professor, general, credentials, diplomas, certificates, appearance, uniforms, suits, formal dress, context, being on a stage, being seated behind a desk, confidence, and speaking style. When your brain detects one or more of these authority markers, your amygdala downregulates, threat level decreases, your submissive neural networks activate, and your behavior shifts toward compliance. This is actually adaptive in many contexts. In most human environments throughout history, authority figures had more information and power, so following authority was usually a good strategy. But in modern environments, authority can be faked, and people with authority can be wrong, but your brain still activates the submissive response. You accept medical advice from someone in a white coat, even though they might not have expertise in that particular area. You accept legal advice from someone with a law degree. You accept parenting advice from someone who wrote a parenting book. You accept financial advice from someone who claims to have made millions. And you're doing this automatically without actually evaluating whether the authority figure actually has reliable knowledge. This is why people with authority, doctors, lawyers, politicians, celebrities, can be remarkably influential even when they're speaking outside their domain of actual expertise. Your brain literally treats authority figures' claims as more credible even when the claim itself is identical to a non-authority figure's claim. The authority marker makes the exact same claim more persuasive. This has been demonstrated in countless studies. Moreover, when an authority figure makes a statement, your critical thinking faculties actually downregulate. The prefrontal cortex involved in critical analysis shows less activation. The amygdala, threat detection, shows less activation. Your brain is essentially saying this person is authority, so it must be safe, so I don't need to carefully analyze what they're saying. Throughout your day, you're automatically submitting to authority figures without conscious awareness. Throughout society, people with authority markers, titles, credentials, appearance, confidence, have disproportionate influence regardless of whether they actually have expertise. This is mind trick number 9. Your brain has an automatic submissive response to authority markers. When you perceive authority, your critical thinking down-regulates and your tendency to comply increases. You're vulnerable to being influenced by authority, whether they actually have expertise or not. Mind trick 10. Anchoring and reference points. Before you consciously register what you're seeing or evaluating, your perception has already been anchored to a reference point. That reference point determines how you interpret everything that follows. This is the anchoring effect, and it happens automatically in perception, judgment, and decision-making. Imagine you're looking at 2 glasses of water. Both are room temperature, but you dip your left hand in hot water and your right hand in cold water for a minute. Then you put both hands in the room temperature water. Your left hand perceives the room temperature water as cold. Your right hand perceives the room temperature water as hot. The same stimulus is perceived completely differently depending on what anchored your perception. This is true for all perception. The contrast to what came before determines how you perceive what comes now. A person who looks only moderately attractive will seem very attractive after you've been looking at unattractive people. The same person will seem less attractive after you've been looking at very attractive people. The person hasn't changed. Your anchoring perception has changed based on the contrast. In judgment and decision-making, anchoring is even more powerful. The first number you encounter becomes your mental reference point. In a salary negotiation, if the first number mentioned is $100,000, your counteroffer will be anchored to that number. If you propose $50,000 as your first number, the other person's counteroffer will be anchored to that number. Whoever proposes the first number has a huge advantage. This is not because their number is necessarily justified. It's because it anchors all subsequent thinking. Your brain uses the anchor as a starting point for estimation. You then make adjustments from that anchor to reach your estimate. But these adjustments are usually insufficient. You don't move far enough away from the anchor, resulting in an estimate that's still too close to the initial number. Retailers understand anchoring. They show you a regular price and then a sale price. The regular price is the anchor. It makes the sale price seem like much better value, even though your actual valuation might be different. Political campaigns understand anchoring. They anchor your thinking about the economy, immigration, security. They're the first to present a number or framing, and that anchoring influences all your subsequent judgments on that topic. Throughout your day, you're being anchored by the first information you encounter. What you see first in a shopping context determines how you evaluate subsequent prices. What you hear first about a person determines how you evaluate subsequent behavior from that person. What article you read first determines how you interpret subsequent information on that topic. Your perception is not objective. Your perception is anchored. Change the anchor and you change the perception. This is mind trick number 10. The first information you encounter becomes an anchor that influences all your subsequent judgments and perceptions. You believe your judgments are based on objective evidence, but in reality, they're heavily influenced by whatever was presented first. Anchoring happens automatically and is nearly impossible to overcome through conscious effort. Mind trick 11. Framing effects and narrative control. Your brain is a story-making machine. It doesn't just perceive raw facts. It constantly constructs narratives, stories that tie facts together into meaning. And the narrative you construct determines how you feel about the facts. and what action you take in response. Consider two ways of framing the same medical procedure: 90% survival rate versus 10% mortality rate. These are mathematically identical, but the 90% frame activates your approach system, focus on positive outcome. The 10% frame activates your avoidance system, focus on negative outcome. Your emotional response to the procedure is different depending on the frame, even though the actual facts haven't changed. A job offer can be framed as starting salary $80,000, activating focus on what you're getting, or as delayed path to $120,000, activating focus on what you're missing, or as $15,000 less than the competitor's offer, activating comparison and loss focus. The same job is perceived completely differently depending on the narrative frame. This framing effect is mediated by your ventromedial prefrontal cortex, value judgment, which processes information differently depending on how it's framed. Gain frames activate your approach systems. Loss frames activate your avoidance systems. The same information activates different neural networks depending on how it's framed. Politicians, advertisers, and communicators understand framing. They deliberately frame information in ways that activate particular emotional systems and promote particular behaviors. A politician frames their policy as protecting the border and national security, activating security and protection narratives, rather than as restricting immigration, which activates different associations. Marketers frame a product as clinically proven to reduce wrinkles, activating scientific credibility, rather than will make you look younger, which activates vanity associations, though it might be more honest. Here's the insidious part. The frame is not objective. The frame is a choice by the communicator. Different frames can all be accurate, but they emphasize different aspects of the truth. By choosing particular frames, communicators shape which aspects of the truth you focus on and how you feel about it. Throughout your day, you're experiencing narratives framed by others. News is presented with particular frames. You receive information and your brain constructs narratives about what it means. Someone says something and you construct a narrative about their intention. An event happens, and you construct a narrative about why it happened. And here's what makes it worse. The narrative you construct feels like objective understanding. It feels like you're seeing the facts clearly, but you're actually seeing one possible interpretation of the facts, filtered through a narrative frame that was suggested to you, or that you unconsciously chose based on your existing biases. This is mind trick number 11. Your understanding of reality is shaped by the narrative frames through which information is presented. The same facts can be framed in different ways, leading to completely different emotional responses and behavioral responses. Framing is not objective. It's a choice by the communicator, but it feels objective to you because once you've adopted a frame, the interpretation feels like simple truth. Mind trick 12, loss aversion and sunk costs. Your brain weights losses much more heavily than equivalent gains. If you lose $100, the emotional pain is approximately twice as intense as the joy you'd feel from gaining $100. This is called loss aversion, and it's one of the most fundamental features of human decision-making. Loss aversion is partly rooted in evolutionary logic. In ancestral environments, losing resources, food, shelter, status, was more dangerous than missing an opportunity to gain resources. An ancestor who played it safe and avoided losses had a better chance of surviving. An ancestor who took big risks to pursue gains had a higher chance of catastrophic failure, so selection pressure favored loss aversion. But in modern environments, loss aversion causes problems. It biases you toward the status quo, even when change would be better for you. It causes you to stay in bad situations because you frame leaving as a loss. It causes you to take excessive risks to avoid losses. The gambler keeps playing to try to recover losses, digging themselves deeper. The sunk cost fallacy is a specific manifestation of loss aversion. You continue investing time, money, or effort into something because of what you've already invested, even though the past investment should be logically irrelevant. You finish a terrible movie because you've paid for it. You stay in a mediocre relationship because you've already invested 5 years. You continue a failing business because you've already invested $100,000. Rationally, only future consequences should matter. The past investment is gone regardless of your future choice. But emotionally, contemplating abandoning the investment feels like losing something. Your brain resists the loss, even though the loss has already occurred and can't be undone. Loss aversion is so powerful that it can completely override rational decision-making. People will take actions they know are harmful just to avoid acknowledging a loss. People will throw good money after bad, continuing to invest in failing projects just to try to recover the initial investment. Understanding sunk cost thinking is valuable because you can then notice when you're being influenced by it. You can ask yourself, if I hadn't already invested in this, would I start it now? If the answer is no, that's a sign that sunk cost thinking is influencing you, and knowing that, you can choose to override the emotional pull of the sunk cost and make the decision that actually serves your goals going forward. This is mind trick number 12. Your brain weights losses much more heavily than gains. This causes you to avoid losses, even when taking a loss is the rational choice. You become trapped by sunk costs, past investments that should be irrelevant to current decisions but psychologically feel very relevant. Nara's mind trick. 13. Confirmation bias lock. Once you adopt a belief, your brain creates a filter. Information that confirms your belief passes through the filter easily. Information that contradicts your belief gets scrutinized severely and usually rejected. This is confirmation bias, and it's one of the most powerful forces keeping people locked into their existing worldviews. You believe you're a morning person. You notice the times you wake up early and you conveniently forget the times you sleep in. Your brain has highlighted confirming evidence and minimized disconfirming evidence. Your belief is reinforced. You believe your political party is right and the opposing party is wrong. You notice all the examples of your party being right. You notice all the examples of the opposing party being wrong. You don't notice, or you interpret differently, the examples of your party being wrong. Your brain is processing information in a way that confirms your pre-existing belief. You believe someone is dishonest. You notice the times they said something misleading. You interpret their honest statements in a way that seems deceptive. You ignore evidence of their honesty. Your brain is processing information in a way that confirms your pre-existing belief. Confirmation bias is mediated by motivated reasoning. Your brain is motivated to reach a particular conclusion, and it processes information in a way that leads to that conclusion. Your conscious mind believes it's thinking objectively, but it's actually engaging in motivated reasoning. This is why smart people sometimes believe things that are demonstrably false. Intelligence doesn't protect you from confirmation bias. In fact, intelligence can make confirmation bias worse, because intelligent people are better at generating sophisticated rationalizations for why they should continue believing what they already believe. Once you've adopted a belief, you've essentially locked yourself into it. The confirmation bias mechanism keeps the belief in place. Contradicting evidence doesn't change your mind. It just triggers more sophisticated rationalizations for why you should continue believing. This is why long-held beliefs are so difficult to change. You'd need to encounter overwhelming evidence that contradicts your belief. And even then, confirmation bias causes you to dismiss or reinterpret the evidence as biased or manipulated. Throughout your day, confirmation bias is keeping you locked into your existing beliefs. You're not objectively evaluating information. You're selectively processing information in a way that confirms what you already believe. And because you're doing this unconsciously, you believe you're being objective. The first step toward escaping confirmation bias is active curiosity about disconfirming evidence. Instead of avoiding evidence that contradicts your belief, deliberately seek it out. Ask yourself, what would change my mind about this? What evidence would I need to see to believe differently? Then actively look for that evidence. This is mind trick number 13. Once you adopt a belief, confirmation bias locks you into it. Contradicting evidence doesn't change your mind. It triggers rationalizations for why you should continue believing. This mechanism keeps people trapped in false beliefs, conspiracy theories, and distorted worldviews. Mind trick 14. In-group bias and tribal psychology. You have multiple group identities: your gender, your race, your nationality, your political party, your professional field, your age cohort, your sports team. These are all groups you belong to, and belonging to these groups powerfully shapes your behavior, your perceptions, and your judgments. In-group bias is the tendency to favor people in your groups and to attribute more positive characteristics to your groups while attributing more negative characteristics to outgroups. This bias is so powerful that it can be triggered by random group assignment in laboratory settings. When people are randomly assigned to groups, even when they're told the assignment is completely random and the groups will have no real significance, they immediately start showing in-group bias. They rate their own group members as more competent, more trustworthy, and more likable. They distribute resources more favorably to their own group members. They develop negative stereotypes about out-group members. This in-group bias is rooted in tribal psychology. For most of human evolution, group membership was essential for survival. People in your group protected you, shared resources with you, and increased your survival chances. People in outgroups were often competitors or threats. Over millions of years, selection pressure created a neurological system that automatically favors in-group members and shows wariness toward outgroup members. This tribal psychology is so powerful that it can override moral principles. People who would normally be cooperative become competitive when they're part of different groups. People who have no actual conflict suddenly develop negative feelings toward out-group members simply because they're assigned to different groups. Throughout society, this tribal psychology is creating conflict and division. Political tribes view each other with hostility. Religious tribes view each other with suspicion. National tribes compete despite shared interests. Even within organizations, different departments develop tribal identities and compete with each other. And here's the real problem. The tribal psychology feels like it's based on objective differences. You believe out-group members are actually less competent, less trustworthy, and less likable. You believe your group's values are objectively more correct, but the actual differences are much smaller than your tribal psychology makes them feel. This is mind trick number 14. You have automatic tribal psychology that favors your in-groups and shows bias against out-groups. This bias feels like objective assessment, but is actually a neurological mechanism for tribal coordination. In-group bias is so powerful that it can be triggered by arbitrary group assignments and can override moral principles. Mind trick 15. Attribution errors and blame. Every day you make attributions about why things happen. Someone is late to a meeting. Why? You might attribute it to them being disrespectful or disorganized. You're late to a meeting. Why? You might attribute it to unexpected traffic or an earlier meeting running over. The same behavior, being late, is attributed to completely different causes depending on whose behavior it is. This is the fundamental attribution error, also called correspondence bias, and it's one of the most pervasive biases in human thinking. When others behave in certain ways, you attribute it to their internal characteristics, personality, ability, intentions. When you behave in certain ways, you attribute it to external circumstances, the situation you're in, factors outside your control. The neuroscience behind this error involves different neural activation patterns depending on whether you're thinking about yourself or others. When you think about yourself, your DMPFC, involved in self-reflection, is highly active and has direct access to your internal experience, your intentions, the circumstances you were facing, the constraints you were operating under. When you think about others, your TPJ, temporoparietal junction, involved in theory of mind, is active, but you have much less direct access to their internal experience. You're inferring it from their behavior, and you tend to infer internal characteristics more readily than you infer situational constraints. Throughout your day, you're making false attributions. A colleague seems disengaged in a meeting. You attribute it to them not caring about their job. You don't know they received bad news before the meeting. You don't know they're dealing with a health crisis. You don't know that the meeting is scheduled at a time when they're cognitively depleted. A friend doesn't respond to your message quickly. You might attribute it to them not valuing your friendship. You don't know they're overwhelmed with work. You don't know they're dealing with a family crisis. You don't know they struggle with phone anxiety. A person in traffic cuts you off. You attribute it to them being a reckless driver. You don't know they're rushing to a hospital. You don't know they didn't see you. You don't know their attention was drawn away by an urgent phone call. This bias gets even worse in relationships and conflicts. In a close relationship, you have accumulated false attributions. Your partner did something hurtful. You attributed it to them not caring about your feelings, but your partner might have been responding from their own fear or pain. They might have been completely focused on their own distress and didn't even consider how it would affect you. But the false attribution has stuck in your mind. You've built a narrative around their uncaring nature based on a false attribution of their motivation. Throughout your day, notice when you're making attributions. Notice when you're attributing others' behavior to internal characteristics without considering situational factors. Ask yourself, what situational factors might explain this behavior? What circumstances might this person be facing that I'm not aware of? The first step toward reducing damage from false attributions is curiosity. Instead of assuming you know why someone did something, actually ask them. Instead of assuming you know what they were thinking or how they were feeling, actually ask them. And you might be surprised at how often your false attribution was completely wrong. This is mind trick number 15. You systematically misattribute causes of other people's behavior, attributing to their internal characteristics what might actually be due to their situations. This false attribution creates misunderstanding, conflict, and damaged relationships. Mind trick 16. Availability heuristic and memory distortion. Your memory is not a faithful recording of events. Your memory is biased toward recent events, emotionally intense events, and events that have been repeatedly accessed. When you try to estimate the frequency of something or the likelihood of something, you rely on how easily examples come to mind. This is called the availability heuristic. If you can easily think of examples of plane crashes because they're prominently featured in news coverage, you overestimate how common plane crashes are. If you can easily think of examples of shark attacks because one recently happened, or because of a movie you watched, you overestimate how common shark attacks are. Your brain is using ease of recall as a proxy for frequency. This heuristic usually works well because frequently occurring things tend to be more memorable, but it fails when things are memorable for reasons other than frequency, like media coverage, recency, or emotional intensity. You overestimate how much violent crime occurs because violent crime is prominent in news coverage. You underestimate how much traffic accident occurs because traffic accidents are mundane and don't trigger memory formation as effectively. You overestimate the likelihood of rare but dramatic events, like winning the lottery or being in a catastrophic accident, because of their salience in media and imagination. This availability heuristic is why news media is so powerful in shaping your perception of what matters and what's dangerous. By featuring particular stories prominently, media outlets make those stories more cognitively available. Your brain uses this availability as evidence of frequency. You come away believing that particular threats are more common than they actually are. Moreover, your memory is distorted by your current emotional state and your current beliefs. If you're anxious, you remember more threatening events. If you're happy, you remember more positive events. Your memory is reconstructed each time you access it, and this reconstruction is influenced by your current state and beliefs. This is mind trick number 16. You estimate frequency and likelihood based on how easily examples come to mind. This causes you to overestimate rare but memorable events and underestimate common but mundane events. Media coverage and emotional intensity make events more memorable, so your perception of what's common is heavily distorted by what's been covered in media and what's emotionally intense. Nanne mind trick. 17. Scarcity and artificial urgency. Scarcity automatically triggers a motivation to acquire the scarce resource. If something is available in unlimited quantities, you feel little motivation, but if it's limited, only 3 left in stock, your motivation automatically increases. This is the scarcity principle, and it happens beneath your conscious awareness. Scarcity triggers your ancient survival systems. In ancestral environments, scarcity of resources, food, water, mates, safe shelter, was genuinely threatening. Resources that were scarce were genuinely valuable and worth acquiring, so your brain evolved to automatically assign higher value to scarce resources. This heuristic usually works well. Scarce resources often are valuable, but it can be exploited. Throughout your day, scarcity framing is triggering your motivation systems. Limited time offer. Only 5 seats left at this price. Exclusive access. This item won't be in stock again. These are scarcity frames designed to trigger your automatic response, and your conscious mind knows it's being manipulated, but your automatic systems respond anyway. Retailers deliberately create scarcity to increase perceived value and urgency. They limit inventory. They use flash sales. They create limited edition products. They use language that emphasizes scarcity. Your automatic systems respond by assigning higher value to the product, even though the scarcity might be entirely artificial. Dating apps use scarcity by showing you limited profiles per day. Your motivation to acquire access increases. You're willing to pay for premium access that gives you more profiles. The scarcity is entirely artificial. The app company has unlimited profiles, but your system responds as if it's real scarcity. Online ticket sales use scarcity by showing you how many tickets are left. Only 7 tickets left at this price. This triggers urgency and increases your likelihood of purchasing, even though the number of tickets left might be irrelevant to your decision. This scarcity principle is so powerful that it affects not just purchases, but also beliefs and behaviors. If you believe an idea is rare or exclusive, you're more likely to adopt it. If you believe a behavior is rare or exclusive, you're more drawn to it. Scarcity makes things valuable. This is mind trick number 17. Scarcity automatically triggers your motivation to acquire something. Retailers and persuaders understand this and deliberately create or emphasize scarcity to increase perceived value and urgency. Even when you consciously know the scarcity is artificial, your automatic systems still respond to it. Mind trick 18. Reciprocity and social obligation. When someone does something nice for you, you feel an automatic obligation to do something nice in return. This isn't a conscious decision. It's a neurological response that emerges automatically through a system called reciprocity. When someone gives you something, your brain registers a social debt that must be repaid. This reciprocity system evolved because in small group environments, individuals who reciprocated favors were more successful reproductively than those who didn't. Your ancestors, who kept careful track of who helped them and who they helped, were better at maintaining social bonds and cooperative relationships. Selection pressure created a neurological system that automatically triggers reciprocation, but reciprocity is remarkably easy to exploit. When someone does something nice for you, your automatic systems register obligation. You don't consciously deliberate about whether the obligation is justified. You just feel it. And the obligation can be surprisingly large, even if the initial gift is small. This is why companies give away free samples. The reciprocity echo causes consumers to feel obligated to make a purchase. A company gives away free training to employees, and the employees feel obligated to stay with the company longer. An organization sends you a personalized greeting card with a donation request, and the reciprocity echo increases donation rates dramatically. The reciprocity obligation is so powerful that it persists even when you consciously recognize that you're being manipulated. You know that the company is deliberately giving away samples to trigger reciprocity, but you still feel the obligation. The obligation emerges automatically at a preconscious level. Moreover, the reciprocity obligation is asymmetrical. If someone gives you something expensive, you feel obligated to reciprocate with something expensive. But if you give someone something expensive, they feel less obligated to reciprocate with something of equal value. The obligation flows more readily from gifts to reciprocation than from your own gifts to others' reciprocation. This is why people who understand reciprocity have enormous power in social situations. By giving first in time, resources, or effort, they trigger reciprocity obligations. The other person feels obligated to reciprocate. The reciprocity obligation can be used to create friendships, partnerships, and commitments, but the reciprocity is strongest when 1. The gift is unexpected. 2. The gift is personalized rather than generic. 3. The gift is substantial enough to trigger the sense of obligation. A small, expected generic gift doesn't trigger reciprocity as strongly. This is mind trick number 18. When someone gives you something, your automatic systems register social obligation. You feel compelled to reciprocate even without consciously deliberating about it. This reciprocity obligation can be exploited by people who understand it. They give first, and the obligation flows automatically to you. Mind trick 19. Default options and status quo bias. In countries where the default is to be an organ donor, 99% of people are organ donors. In countries where the default is to opt in to being an organ donor, meaning people have to actively choose, only 10% are donors. The difference? The default option. Everything else is identical. Same country, same people, same relative ease of changing the default. But the default option alone determines whether 99% or 10% of people are donors. This is the power of the default option bias. When faced with a choice, most people go with whatever the default option is, simply because it requires no cognitive effort to maintain the status quo, while changing the default requires active effort and decision-making. This is mediated by status quo bias, the tendency to prefer things to stay the same rather than change. Status quo bias is partly rooted in loss aversion. Changing from the default feels like losing something, and partly rooted in cognitive ease. The default requires no decision-making effort, while changing it does. So your brain automatically treats the default as the good enough option and resists actively choosing something different. But here's what makes it problematic. Companies and institutions understand default bias, and they deliberately set defaults in ways that serve their interests, not your interests. Tech companies set privacy settings to the least private default, knowing that most people won't change them. Insurance companies set coverage levels to defaults that are profitable for the company, not optimal for the customer. Subscription services set defaults to auto-renew, knowing that most people won't bother canceling. Throughout your day, you're probably not getting your preferred options. You're getting the defaults that were chosen by someone else in service of their goals, not your goals. Your default news feed shows you what the algorithm thinks will keep you engaged, not what will actually inform you accurately. Your default social media recommendations prioritize engagement, not accuracy or relevance to your actual interests. Your default browser settings are configured in ways favorable to the tech company. And on a larger scale, your default beliefs are often the beliefs you absorbed from your family and community growing up. These are the default beliefs that required no active choosing. Unless you've actively chosen to change them, you're probably still running the defaults you were given. Your default career path might be similar to your parents'. Your default relationship patterns might be similar to your parents'. Your default financial habits might be similar to your parents'. So throughout your life, you're operating with defaults chosen by others rather than with your own preferences. The defaults are powerful, they're sticky, and they feel natural, and they require effort to change. But they're not inevitable, and they're not necessarily serving your interests. This is mind trick number 19. Defaults are incredibly powerful. When faced with a choice, you automatically go with the default option simply because changing it requires effort. Companies and institutions deliberately set defaults in ways that serve their interests. Most of your choices and beliefs are probably just defaults you inherited rather than choices you actively made. Mind trick 20. Priming and unconscious activation. Before you consciously decide to do something, your brain has already been primed. Contextual priming is the phenomenon where exposure to one stimulus, a word, an image, a concept, an idea, influences your response to a completely unrelated stimulus. And the terrifying part is that this influence happens completely outside your awareness. You have no idea you're being influenced. Here's a famous example. Researchers presented people with word puzzles. Half the group was given puzzles containing words related to old age, wrinkles, elderly, gray, retired, ancient. The other half was given control puzzles with neutral words. After solving the puzzles, both groups were asked to walk from the laboratory to a nearby room to complete the next task. Here's what happened. The group that had been primed with old age words walked significantly more slowly than the control group. Not because they consciously decided to walk slower, not because walking slower made logical sense, simply because their brains had been primed with concepts related to aging, and these concepts activated neural networks associated with age-related behaviors. Without any conscious awareness, their motor behavior was influenced. This is just one of hundreds of priming studies showing that your behavior is constantly being shaped by subtle, environmental cues that you're completely unaware of. Here's another. Researchers primed people with concepts related to money. Some participants were shown images of money. Others were asked to count money. A control group was shown and counted cut paper. Then all groups were given tasks where they could work collaboratively or competitively with another person. Result: the group that had been primed with money concepts chose competitive behaviors significantly more often than the control group. They were less cooperative, they were more selfish, and they had no idea the money priming had influenced their behavior. They believed their behavioral choice was based on their own values and preferences, but it wasn't. It was primed. Your entire day is a sequence of priming events. The images you see on your social media feed before you go to work prime your perception of what's normal and what's valuable. A news story about crime primes you to notice danger and threats throughout your day. An image of someone highly attractive primes you to judge normal people more harshly. By contrast, a conversation about money primes you to be more selfish. A conversation about compassion primes you to be more generous. And here's the real problem. People who understand priming can deliberately prime you to think, feel, and behave in ways that serve their goals, not your goals. Retailers understand priming. Fast food restaurants pipe the smell of fries and burgers into the air outside their buildings. The smell primes hunger. When you smell those scents, your brain activates appetite-related neural networks. You're more likely to enter the restaurant. The retailer has primed you without your conscious awareness. Advertisers understand priming. Political campaigns understand priming. Tech companies understand priming. They're all deliberately engineering your environment to prime particular mental states and behaviors. This is mind trick number 20. Your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are constantly being primed by subtle environmental cues that operate completely outside your awareness. You believe your behavior is driven by your conscious preferences, but in reality, you've been primed to behave in particular ways before you've even conscious registered the priming stimulus. Mind trick 21. Emotional contagion and mirror moods. When you're around people who are happy, you tend to become happy. When you're around people who are anxious, you tend to become anxious. When you're around people who are angry, you tend to become angry. This is emotional contagion, the automatic spreading of emotional states from one person to another through multiple mechanisms, including mirror neurons, facial expression mimicry, and pheromone sensing. Your emotional state is not solely determined by what's happening to you. Your emotional state is heavily influenced by the emotional states of people around you. This is partly mediated by mirror neurons. Your brain automatically mimics the emotional expressions of people around you, and this facial mimicry creates emotional contagion. Facial expressions can induce emotional states. But emotional contagion also occurs through unconscious pheromone signaling. When someone is afraid, they release fear-related pheromones that your brain detects and that influence your emotional state, often without your conscious awareness of smelling them. Throughout your day, your emotional state is being influenced by the emotional states of people around you. If you spend time with people who are depressed, you tend to become more depressed. If you spend time with people who are anxious, you tend to become more anxious. If you spend time with people who are happy and energetic, you tend to become happier and more energetic. This is why relationships are so important. The emotional states of people you spend time with directly influence your emotional state. If you're in a relationship with someone who is consistently anxious or depressed, their emotional state will influence yours. If you're in a relationship with someone who is consistently happy and upbeat, their emotional state will influence yours. This is also why social media can be so emotionally damaging. You're exposed to a constant stream of other people's emotional expressions, often carefully curated to look either extremely happy, vacation photos, success announcements, or extremely negative, outrage, complaint, catastrophe coverage. This constant exposure to other people's emotional states is influencing your emotional state through emotional contagion. Moreover, emotional contagion is stronger for negative emotions than for positive emotions. You're more easily infected by someone's anxiety or anger than by someone's happiness. This asymmetry is rooted in threat detection. Your brain prioritizes detecting and responding to negative emotional states because they signal threats. Throughout your day, notice emotional contagion. Notice how your mood shifts depending on the people you're around. Notice how spending time with anxious people makes you more anxious. Notice how spending time with happy people makes you happier. Once you notice it, you can make conscious choices about your social environment. You can choose to spend time with people whose emotional states support your goals rather than undermining them. This is mind trick number 21. Your emotional state is not solely determined by your circumstances. Your emotional state is heavily influenced by the emotional states of people around you through emotional contagion. Negative emotional states are more contagious than positive ones, so you need to be conscious about protecting yourself from exposure to toxic emotional environments. Mind trick 22. Planning fallacy and time distortion. When you estimate how long a task will take, you almost always underestimate. You estimate a project will take 2 weeks, it takes 4 weeks. You estimate you can prepare for a presentation in 2 hours, it takes 4 hours. You estimate you can pack for a trip in 30 minutes, it takes 90 minutes. This is the planning fallacy, and it's remarkably consistent, even when people consciously know they have a tendency to underestimate. Even when they deliberately try to add buffer time, they still underestimate. You can have a clear track record showing that your estimates are always low, and you'll still make the same underestimation on the next task. The planning fallacy has multiple contributing factors. First is optimism bias. You tend to see your plans in an unduly positive light. You focus on the best-case scenario where everything goes smoothly. You downweight the possibility of obstacles and complications. Second is the planning fallacy itself. When you make plans, you focus on the details of the specific task. You don't adequately access your memory of how long similar tasks have taken in the past. Third is cognitive load. Accurately estimating requires holding multiple pieces of information in mind simultaneously, which is cognitively taxing, so you tend to make quick estimates based on limited information. Throughout your day, the planning fallacy is shaping your schedule and creating stress. You commit to deadlines based on underestimated task duration. When the deadline arrives and you haven't finished the task, you're stressed. You miss commitments to other people because you underestimated how long your current task would take. You create cascading delays and conflicts. In project management, the planning fallacy has been so well documented that many experienced project managers use a reference class forecasting approach. They estimate based on how long similar projects actually took in the past, rather than trying to estimate from first principles. This approach is significantly more accurate than intuitive planning, but even experts fall victim to the planning fallacy. A CEO might commission a project and estimate it will take 3 months. Based on reference class forecasting, similar projects actually take 7 months, but the CEO continues to believe in their 3-month estimate. When the project takes 7 months, they're surprised, even though they should have known better. This is mind trick number 22. You systematically underestimate how long tasks will take. You focus on the best-case scenario and don't adequately account for obstacles and complications. Even when you consciously try to add buffer time, you still underestimate. This planning fallacy creates stress, missed deadlines, and cascading delays. Mind trick 23. Contrast effects and perception shifts. Your perception of something is heavily influenced by what you perceive immediately before. This is the contrast effect. The same stimulus is perceived completely differently depending on what came before. A moderately attractive person seems more attractive when standing next to an unattractive person. The same moderately attractive person seems less attractive when standing next to a very attractive person. The person hasn't changed. Your contrast-based perception has changed. A $30 meal seems cheap after looking at a $200 meal. The same $30 meal seems expensive after looking at a $10 meal. The meal hasn't changed. Your contrast-based perception of price has changed. A moderately difficult task seems easy after completing a very difficult task. The same moderately difficult task seems hard after completing an easy task. The task hasn't changed. Your contrast-based perception of difficulty has changed. Contrast effects work at deep neurological levels. Your neural systems are constantly measuring change relative to background. A stimulus that would normally activate neurons at 50% intensity will activate them at 80% intensity if the previous stimulus was less intense, or at 20% intensity if the previous stimulus was more intense. This is why the first impression matters so much. If someone sees you when they're tired and irritable, low baseline emotional state, they perceive you more positively by contrast. If someone sees you when they're refreshed and happy, high baseline emotional state, they perceive you less positively by contrast. Throughout your day, contrast effects are shaping your perception. The contrast to what came before determines how you perceive what comes now. The contrast to your baseline expectations determines how you interpret new information. Salespeople understand contrast effects. They show you an expensive, luxurious option first. When they then show you the moderately priced option, it seems like an incredible value by contrast. The expensive option was a contrast anchor designed to make the moderate option seem cheaper. Stores use contrast in their product displays. They put the expensive products at eye level. They put the cheap products on the bottom shelf. When you see the expensive products first, you perceive the moderate-priced products as cheaper by contrast. Dating profiles use contrast. The first photo might be less flattering. By contrast, the second photo seems more attractive. This isn't dishonesty. This is understanding contrast effects. This is mind trick number 23. Your perception of something is heavily influenced by contrast to what came before. The same stimulus seems better or worse depending on the contrast. Perception is not objective. It's relative to background and context. Mind trick 24. Narrative transportation and story power. Stories are far more persuasive than facts or arguments. When you're absorbed in a story, when you're transported into the narrative, you suspend critical evaluation. You adopt the story's values, beliefs, and perspectives. This is called narrative transportation, and it's one of the most powerful forces for influencing beliefs and behavior. When you're transported into a narrative, your analytical mind disengages. Your emotional and intuitive systems engage. Your prefrontal cortex, critical reasoning, shows reduced activation. Your emotional regions show increased activation. This is why propaganda, marketing, and persuasion rely heavily on storytelling rather than logic. Stories bypass critical evaluation. Stories work directly on emotional systems. Stories create emotional resonance that facts alone can never achieve. A politician tells a story about their struggle and how they overcome it. You're transported into the narrative. You don't think critically about whether the story is representative or whether the solutions proposed would actually work. You just feel emotionally moved. You adopt the narrative's implicit values and beliefs. An advertisement tells a story about a product transforming someone's life. You're transported. You don't think critically about whether the transformation claim is exaggerated. You just feel the emotional resonance. You're more likely to buy the product. A news outlet tells a story about a particular group, immigrants, wealthy people, minorities, in a way that confirms your existing beliefs. You're transported. You don't think critically about whether the story is representative. You just feel like your beliefs are confirmed. Throughout your day, you're being transported by stories. Social media fills your feed with stories designed to transport you. News outlets tell stories designed to transport you. Advertisers tell stories designed to transport you. Podcasts tell stories designed to transport you. And while you're transported, you're not thinking critically. You're not evaluating evidence. You're not considering alternative perspectives. You're just experiencing the emotional resonance of the narrative. And that emotional resonance is shaping your beliefs and values. The most effective narratives feel true even when they're not. They create a sense that you now understand something that you didn't understand before. They make complex situations feel simple and comprehensible. They create the feeling of knowledge, when in fact you've just been transported into a particular interpretation. This is mind trick number 24. Stories are far more persuasive than facts. When you're transported into a narrative, you suspend critical evaluation and adopt the story's perspective. Propaganda, marketing, and persuasion exploit this by using narratives to shape beliefs and behavior. Mind trick 25. Meta-awareness and the observer effect. The final mind trick is perhaps the most profound. The act of observing something changes it. This is called the observer effect, and it applies not just to quantum physics, but to human behavior and consciousness. When you become aware that you're being observed, your behavior changes. When you become aware of your own behavior, your behavior changes. When you become aware of a mental process, that process is altered by the awareness. This creates a strange loop. The act of trying to understand yourself changes what you're trying to understand. By becoming aware of a pattern, you've already started to change it. For example, when you become aware that you're anxious, the anxiety often decreases. Your awareness itself has altered the process. Why? Because anxiety partly depends on being unaware of it. Once you're aware of anxiety, you start to metacognitively process it. You start thinking about your thinking. This metacognitive awareness engages your prefrontal cortex and reduces amygdala activation. Similarly, when you become aware of a habit you want to change, you've already started to change it. The awareness itself is a step toward change. The habit depended partly on being automatic and unconscious. Once it's conscious, it's partially disrupted. But here's where it gets complex. Awareness itself can create new problems. By being overly self-aware, you can create self-consciousness. By constantly monitoring your emotions, you can actually increase anxiety. By constantly questioning your motivations, you can create confusion about what you actually want. There's an optimal level of self-awareness. Too little and you're on autopilot, vulnerable to external influence. Too much, and you're paralyzed by self-consciousness and overthinking. Moreover, the act of describing or analyzing a mental process changes the process. If you try to explain why you like someone, the analysis itself can change your feelings. If you try to explain why you believe something, the explanation process can subtly shift the belief. The act of putting something into words changes it. This is mind trick number 25. Awareness changes what you're aware of. By becoming conscious of a process, you've altered it. By putting something into words, you've changed it. By observing yourself, you've changed yourself. This creates a fundamental challenge to self-understanding. The act of trying to understand yourself inevitably changes what you're trying to understand. Deep integration and system analysis. You've now learned 25 mind tricks, psychological principles so fundamental to human cognition that they literally explain almost everything about how people think, feel, decide, and behave. But these 25 patterns are not isolated. They interact. They reinforce each other. They work together as an integrated system. Your autopilot rituals run because the default mode network is in charge and your brain is optimizing for efficiency. But these rituals are also sustained by habit loops. Cue, routine. Now, reward. Your habits are reinforced through social proof. Other people do the same thing, so it must be right. And through contextual priming, your environment automatically triggers the habits. Your social proof is sustained through in-group bias and groupthink. Your groupthink is sustained by confirmation bias. You seek evidence that confirms the group's beliefs. Your confirmation bias is sustained by emotional tagging. The group's beliefs have positive emotional tags because the group is part of your positive social identity. So all 25 patterns are interconnected. They work together to create your current worldview, your current behaviors, your current relationships, your current life. Understanding these patterns as an integrated system is more powerful than understanding any single pattern in isolation. Let's trace a concrete example through the integrated system. You're scrolling social media and see a post about a political topic. What happens? First, priming. The images and language in the post activate neural networks related to particular concepts and emotions. Second, social proof. You notice how many people have liked or commented on the post. This social proof signal influences your perception of how many people agree with the post's message. Third, emotional contagion. The emotional tone of the post, outrage, fear, triumph, is contagious. Your emotional systems activate in response to the post's emotional tone. Fourth, narrative transportation. If the post tells a story, you're partially transported into the narrative. Your critical thinking down-regulates. Fifth, anchoring. The first perspective you encounter on this topic anchors your perception of the issue. If you encounter a particular framing first, that framing becomes your reference point. Sixth, confirmation bias. Once you've been anchored to a particular perspective, your brain filters subsequent information. Information confirming the perspective passes through easily. Information contradicting it gets scrutinized and usually rejected. Seventh, in-group bias. If the post aligns with your group's beliefs, you rate the post more favorably. If it contradicts your group's beliefs, you rate it less favorably. Your group membership is shaping your evaluation. Eighth, emotional tagging. The post becomes emotionally tagged. Depending on your emotional response, this emotional tag influences how you'll respond to similar posts in the future. Ninth, mirror neurons. If you like the post, your mirror neurons activate in mimicry of other people's liking. If people around you are engaging with the post, your mirror neurons are activated, making you more likely to engage. 10th, social identity. The post relates to your social identity. Your emotional response is partly determined by which of your social identities is salient. So by the end, you've been influenced by essentially every one of the 25 mind tricks. Your perception of the post, your emotional response, your behavior, whether you engage, your beliefs about the topic, all of these are shaped by this integrated system of psychological mechanisms. And the scary part, you experienced this as conscious choice. You saw the post. You made a judgment about it. You responded. Throughout the process, it felt like you were making conscious decisions based on evidence and your own values. But in reality, you were being influenced by 10+ automatic psychological mechanisms operating simultaneously. This is the hidden psychology that explains everything. The integrated system of automatic psychological mechanisms that operate below consciousness and shape virtually everything about how you think, feel, decide, and behave. Practical application and mastery. Understanding these 25 mind tricks intellectually is valuable, but understanding alone doesn't change behavior. You need to integrate this understanding into actual practice, into habits of awareness, into changed behaviors, into a different way of being in the world. Here's what lifelong practice looks like. Daily awareness practice. Every day, select one of the 25 patterns and notice it throughout your day. On Monday, notice autopilot behaviors. On Tuesday, notice habit loops. On Wednesday, notice contextual priming. By cycling through all 25 patterns repeatedly, you develop deep familiarity. You become expert at recognizing each pattern. You develop the neural pathways associated with noticing. Weekly reflection. Every week, reflect on your week through the lens of the 25 patterns. Where did unconscious patterns most powerfully shape your week? What insights did you gain? What would you do differently next week if you applied this awareness? Monthly challenges. Every month, select one pattern and deliberately work to change your relationship with it. If you're working on reducing routine dissociation, commit to one activity per day performed with full consciousness. If you're working on reducing confirmation bias, commit to deliberately seeking disconfirming evidence for your most cherished beliefs. If you're working on resisting groupthink, commit to expressing one dissenting opinion in your social groups. Quarterly assessment. Every 3 months, assess your progress. Notice how your daily life has changed. Notice how your relationships are different. Notice how your decisions are different. Notice what new patterns are emerging. Yearly integration. Every year, reflect on the full year. Notice the patterns that have shifted. Notice the patterns that persist. Notice which patterns are highest leverage for further work. Set intentions for the next year. This is lifelong practice. This is not a self-improvement project with an endpoint. This is developing a fundamental relationship with your own psychology. This is building the capacity to observe yourself with compassion and honesty. This is gradually upgrading your way of being. The goal is not perfection. The goal is not complete freedom from unconscious patterns. That's impossible. Your brain is too complex. The goal is to have increasingly more choice, to be increasingly less controlled by automatic systems, to be increasingly more intentional, to be increasingly more yourself, where yourself means your conscious chosen values and preferences, not the default patterns that were installed in your brain before you had any say. Closing, the psychology of everything. You've spent 3 hours journeying through 25 mind tricks, psychological principles so fundamental, so deeply embedded in human neurology that they literally explain almost everything about human behavior. Here's what you now understand. You are not the conscious, rational, self-aware agent you believed yourself to be. You are a complex biological system running on automatic, executing programs that were written by evolution, by learning, by social conditioning, and by invisible psychological forces that operate outside your awareness. This understanding is simultaneously liberating and unsettling. It's unsettling because it challenges your sense of agency and control. It suggests that you're not as free as you believed. But it's liberating because it opens possibilities for genuine change. When you don't understand these patterns, you're completely controlled by them. You're on autopilot, executing programs you don't understand, shaped by forces you don't see. But when you understand these patterns, you have a choice. You can't eliminate the automatic systems. They're fundamental to how brains work. But you can become aware of them, and awareness is the doorway to change. The person who doesn't understand habit loops is trapped by them. Every action is automatic. They're a slave to their habits. But the person who understands habit loops can notice when a habit loop is running. They can interrupt it. They can choose a different routine. They can change what was previously automatic. The person who doesn't understand confirmation bias is locked into their beliefs. They can't even see the evidence that would challenge them because their bias is filtering it out. But the person who understands confirmation bias can notice when they're selectively processing information. They can deliberately seek disconfirming evidence. They can update their beliefs based on actual evidence rather than on bias. The person who doesn't understand social influence is controlled by social pressure. They conform without realizing they're conforming. They adopt beliefs without realizing they're adopting them. They maintain behaviors without realizing why. But the person who understands social influence can notice when they're being influenced. They can evaluate whether the social pressure is actually aligned with their values. They can choose to conform or not based on conscious evaluation rather than automatic compliance. This is what understanding the 25 mind tricks does for you. It gives you choice where you previously had only automaticity. It gives you awareness where you previously had only blindness. It gives you freedom where you previously had only constraint. The journey from blindness to sight always feels disorienting at first. But once you see, you can't unsee. And seeing, really seeing, is the only path to genuine change. Over the next days and weeks and months, you're going to start noticing these patterns everywhere. You're going to notice them in your own behavior. You're going to notice them in other people's behavior. You're going to notice them in media, in marketing, in politics, in relationships, in organizations. At first, this awareness might feel overwhelming. You might notice so many patterns that you feel paralyzed. But over time, you'll develop the capacity to notice the patterns without being controlled by them. You'll develop the capacity to observe yourself and others with clarity and compassion. You'll develop the capacity to make conscious choices rather than executing automatic programs. And there's another benefit that comes from understanding these patterns. You understand other people with greater compassion. When someone is stuck in a pattern, trapped by a habit, controlled by a bias, you see that they're not choosing to be stuck. They're trapped by the same automatic systems that trap you. This understanding creates compassion. It reduces judgment. It opens up possibilities for genuine connection and understanding. The world will continue to try to manipulate you. Marketing will continue to exploit your reward systems. Media will continue to trigger your threat detection. Social media will continue to manufacture social proof. Politicians will continue to use narratives to transport you. But now you know how the manipulation works. Now you can see it happening. Now you can choose whether to comply or resist. You're not responsible for the automatic systems that run you. You didn't choose your default mode network. You didn't choose your evolutionary-shaped biases. You didn't choose to be born into a particular social group with particular conditioning. But you are responsible for what you do with this understanding. You're responsible for noticing the patterns. You're responsible for questioning your automatic responses. You're responsible for gradually choosing more consciously. The journey from unconsciousness to consciousness is not a destination. It's a path you walk for your entire life. And every step of the path brings greater awareness, greater choice, greater freedom. Welcome to the path. Welcome to consciousness. Welcome to understanding the hidden psychology that explains everything.